Good morning. I must tell you, having been through two services now, this does not sound like a church that's in transition. It does not. It sounds like a joyful group of people who are excited to worship, and I just want to encourage you as our congregation continues to look for God's next senior pastor. Just keep the faith, keep praying for our search committee, and it's just very exciting to me to have seen the two services come, even in the summertime when crowds are down a little bit. I'm just very encouraged by what I've seen here today. 43 years ago, some of you have heard this story, most have not. 43 years ago, this building was not here. And the church parsonage where Danny and Martha Ruling, who pastored here for so many years, lived, was just to my left, just a few feet to my left. And you walked across a little yard, a little courtyard between the old sanctuary, which is over here to my right, and their home. And Micah Ruling and I had become best friends. We were at Fraser Grammar School at that time, which is no longer there. It sat where the softball field is today. And I remember walking home with Micah that day from school. The fence, where you walk through the fence out here today onto the ball field, is just like it was 43 years ago, the little opening that you walk through. And that was their front yard. In any event, Micah and I happened to walk home that day. And of course, this is before social media. People had televisions, but they actually had to get up from their chair, walk to the TV, and change it to one of three channels. If you lived in the country, if you lived in town, the cable package at that time had a whopping 13 channels. But however many channels you had to walk the TV to do it. Imagine that, young people. So Mike and I walked home that day, and we sat on the steps of the parsonage, and Danny came out this door right here, which is a little different at that time, and he walked across the courtyard, and he sat down on the porch with me and Micah, and he said, "Boys, I've got some bad news. President Reagan has been shot." And he said it in such a way, it was a dire tone that he had, and he was emotional about it. And Mike and I both quickly became emotional. We didn't know exactly why, because we were 10 years old, but we knew that was bad. Whatever that meant, it was bad. And, of course, the rest is now history. But that was 43 years ago, and so imagine my surprise last night when I was putting the finishing touches on our message today, when Nolan walked into the living room. And he said, "Hey, Donald Trump has been shot at a rally in Pennsylvania." And I got to tell you, my heart just sank. Politics aside, it doesn't. Your politics mean nothing, frankly, in the grand scheme of things. But to just think that someone would be so angry that they would climb on the roof of a building and shoot at someone who has already been the president and may very well be the president again, was just disturbing, isn't it? So all that to say today, there's a passage in Proverbs. I couldn't put my finger on it right now if I had to, but it speaks to the morning coming. You've had a bad day, but tomorrow the sun comes up again if the Lord tarries his coming. And that's what I'd like to say to you today. We live in a world that is a mess. It's nothing short of a mess. We've got problems that we never dreamed we might have. None of this, however, surprises God. That shooting yesterday did not surprise God. In fact, if you think about Donald Trump standing here and addressing this crowd, and at the exact moment that guy pulls that trigger, he turns his head to look at this screen, and it may very well have been the thing that saved him. Is that not providential? Of course it is. How could people not believe that is the way God has ordered it to be? So There's two things that I guess that I would say just before we get into Matthew 7, which is what we all are here for. Don't be part of the problem would be a challenge to you and to me personally. People are angry, and for whatever reason, they're not sure why. That's the thing about it. If you're going to be angry, you ought to know what you're angry about. We live in the greatest country in the world. People have got more money on average than they've ever had. Most of us get 3 squares a day. We live in homes where it's 72 degrees. And even if it's not, you can turn fans on and still live through it. Happens every day. We have cars to drive. We have gasoline to put in the cars. We've even come up with these electric things that some people have bought into, and you can plug it in and then drive it. But at the end of the day, God's Word is all that is going to matter. None of those other things are going to matter. And unfortunately, images will come out very quickly, and the image you're seeing now, the first image they show is Donald Trump being shot, and his ear is bleeding, and the Secret Service have pounded around. The second image you see is this older gentleman who's likely disturbed as well. And he is sticking up his middle finger to the camera. That's what he's doing. And he's using the words as well. I have no idea who he's talking to. But I know he's angry. And there'll be t-shirts made with that man on the t-shirt. And that's what some people will take from that. And throngs of people will go out and buy the t-shirt of a man who's shooting off or flipping a bird to some vague person out there because he's so angry. So don't buy the t-shirt. Please, don't buy the t-shirt. Don't add to it in some way. We're not to be angry with one another. It's a beautiful day in that Donald Trump's not dead. But I'd also be saying that if it were Joe Biden and he had almost been killed. I would still be saying Joe Biden's not dead. And so from that standpoint, it's a wonderful day. But the existence of those men has nothing to do with where you'll spend eternity. Not one thing. It has zero to do with where you'll spend eternity. And they can stand up there, they can pump their fists, they can incite hatred, they can do anything they want to do, but they will also stand before God someday, and they will have to answer. They will have to stand before the judge, and they'll have to answer for their actions. So enough about that. I just want to say, hey, it's a great day, but not because of what happened yesterday. It's a great day because we serve a risen Savior. And so let's turn to Matthew 7, and we're going to continue in our series in the Sermon on the Mount. It's been an unbelievable series of sermons because Jesus talks about so many things that are good for us. And heretofore, he has, we've come to chapter 7 today, and heretofore, we have just learned so much. He gives us the Beatitudes. He discusses religious activities like fasting and tithing, material goods, how to handle money, how to handle wealth. But today, in these 6 verses, and really there's 12 verses. We'll just cover 6, but there's 12 verses here in chapter 7 where Jesus turns his attention to human relationships or right relationships. Now, thousands of books have been written by psychologists, by people who pretend to know what they're talking about, to teach you how to have right relationships with people. And some of you go out and buy them. They fly off the shelves like hotcakes. And yet in 12 verses, Jesus gives us the summation of how to live with one another and how to have right relationship with one another. The first 6 verses in chapter 7 are the negatives, or the things you should not do. 7 through 12 are the things you should do. So today we're going to discuss those not to do's, as we turn our attention to these human relationships. As we just think about all of these things that we've come to know and learn in this series of Sermon on the Mount, it's hard for us to imagine in the culture we live in that Jesus could so succinctly give us direction about how to live our lives. And yet that's exactly what he does. Now, I want you to keep in mind that the backdrop for all of this is a world in which the Pharisees made all the rules. And the Jewish people were subservient to those rules. Now, do you remember when you were a kid and you're playing ball at somebody's house, and the kid's house you were playing ball at makes all the rules, right? You remember that? They made all the rules. And so guess what? The rules were always designed to benefit the kid that made the rules. It's no different with the Pharisees. Pharisees wrote, and scribes wrote all these rules, these regulations, these standards, these things that had to be done in order to be in good stead with God. And so the rules benefited them. And they wrote them in such a way that no one else could possibly live up to them. And so nobody else was good enough. So in this chapter that the world now misconstrues consistently, Jesus in verse 1 is really talking to the Pharisees when he says, don't judge. And ultimately, if we stop there, it'd be enough. Don't judge. Don't be critical. Don't hold yourself up to some lofty standard that you really can't meet and then expect somebody else to do the same. They were totally condemning of everyone around them. If you think about verse 1, let's just read it together. Judge not that you be not judged. Chapter 7, Matthew. Judge not that you be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce you will be judged, and with the measure you use it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's house, or your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. Can you turn that down just a shade? I'm getting a little something. I don't know what the something is, but I've got plenty of voice to get it there, I'm sure. So when he says here in verse 1, judge not that you be not judged, would you believe that that is quickly overtaking John 3:16 as the most used verse? Judge not lest you be judged. You know why that is? It's because people don't want to live with any boundaries. They don't want boundaries. They want to do what they want to do when they want to do it. It's that old Burger King, have it your way mentality. We'll just drive through. Man, you can get it any way you want if they can find enough people to work there. All right? But we love to throw that around in a secular culture like we live in. Hey, man, you can't judge me for that. It's not what Jesus is talking about here. He's talking directly to those Pharisees when he says, judge not lest ye be judged. This first verse, though, is perfect for our time as humans. It's perfect for our time in 2024 as humans. Why is that? It's because our time hates theology. It hates conviction. It hates doctrine. It hates strong-minded people. Instead, our time wants unity. We just want everybody to get along. You do your thing, I'll do mine. We have a very laissez-faire approach to how we live together, work together, pray together. Oh, don't offend me. Don't you dare offend me. It's a tough predicament that we're in. But what Jesus is talking about here in this first verse is not to say we're to be flabby sentimentalists or undiscriminating or have no discernment. If you're not supposed to discriminate or have discernment, how are you going to recognize verse 6? Do not give dogs what is holy. Do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. If you're not to discriminate, how in the world are you going to recognize the dogs and the hogs? Or the dogs and the hogs, depending on where you're from. How do you recognize that? How will you recognize that if you don't have some discriminatory part of you that evaluates the people you live, you work, you play with? Instead, he's talking about the Pharisees, and he's talking about their piety. He's talking about their condescending attitude, this holier-than-thou mentality that Christ's ministry so soundly rejected. Keep in mind, this entire Sermon on the Mount flips on its head all that the Pharisees had taught the Jewish people. Flipped it right on its head. Everything the Pharisees had taught, Jesus says, no, it's not the way it is. That's not the way this is. This whole external morality, that won't work. You must have a heart change. You must have an inner morality. This is not to say, men and women, that we're to be indifferent to people, but we are to be discerning. You see, my friends, criticism is like a boomerang. You ever thrown a boomerang? I never was any good at it. I had one as a kid, and you'd throw it out there, and the intent was throw it out, and what happens? Comes back. Mine got out there and just fell there. But if you can throw one, supposedly, you throw a boomerang, it goes all the way out there and it comes back. I think of Haman in the book of Esther. You know that story about Haman? He was after the Jews. He was after Mordecai. He even built gallows to hang Mordecai on. And as chance would have it, he ends up being hung on his own gallows. The gallows that he built for Mordecai. Or in Judges 1 when Adonibezek, if you go back, just jot that note down, Judges 1, Adonibezek, he refers to the 70 kings that in his career he had cut their thumbs off and their big toes. Like that was his thing. And once he was captured by Judah, guess what? They cut off his thumbs and his big toes. And all he could say was, the Lord has requited for what I have done. So in other words, the Lord has exacted revenge here. And I've got nobody to blame but myself for this revengeful spirit that I've had. You know, in early Greece, trials were held in the dark. Probably didn't know that. That's something you can use at a party or a social gathering sometime to impress your friends. The trials were held in the dark. You know why? It was to remove prejudice. It was to remove criticism. It was to remove judgment from the jury. And so the only thing that was heard in a trial in early Greece was testimony. And it was in pitch black. So that the decisions rendered were always without judgment and criticism. And they were always fair. Montaigne tells a story about early Persia and a judge who made his decision because he was bribed. And when King Cambyses found out about it, he ordered the judge be executed. And once executed, he ordered his skin be removed. And once his skin was removed, he ordered it to be upholstered onto a chair And all judges from that point forward would render their verdicts from that chair with the skin of a bribed judge. You think that was an effective prop? You think every judge that sat in that chair didn't think about their judgment before they made it? Without criticism, they made those decisions fairly. Well, there's 3 points we need to make today. If you're a note taker, this would be point 1. Verses 1 and 2, there is a caution to be heeded. There is a caution to be heeded. The word judge means to pronounce judgment, to express strong disapproval or harsh criticism. Jesus says, judge not. Does this mean that all judgment is wrong? No. There are multiple occasions where Christians are called on to exercise judgment over others. This may be hard to hear in this world where we don't get to judge anyone. 1 Corinthians 5:3, Paul judges a man guilty of fornication with his father's wife. He condemns the man and calls the church to do the same. 1 John 4:1-6, believers are commanded to judge religions and statements of preachers and teachers to see if they line up with the gospel. Matthew 7:15-20, over just a page, we're obligated to examine the fruit of those around us and base their fellowship with them on what we see. So what Jesus is talking about here is toward the Pharisees, this old fault-finding, picky, habitually criticizing, seeing the bad in others. And at this point in the program, you're sitting there thinking, boy, Lebron, I sure am glad you brought this word to these people. There's a lot of people sitting on my road need to hear this. That's our reaction. So many times when somebody pushes that button and says, we need to be cautious about judging, about criticizing, about being mean-spirited, about having a holier-than-thou attitude, about being some elite set of Christian people. There is nothing that's elite about you. Not one thing. Not one thing that's elite about you. So that old fault-finding attitude has got to stop, Jesus is saying, and he condemns that attitude. Looking at verse 2 more closely, who sets himself up as the judge of others will himself face judgment someday. Romans 14:2, so then each of us will give an account of himself to God. God will use the same yardstick to judge the critic that he uses to judge others. There's no difference. Donald Trump's yardstick's not going to be any different than Joe's. It's not going to be any different. It's going to be the very same yardstick that he uses to judge your life. Now, there's some additional thoughts on judgmentalism. One is you shouldn't criticize people because you don't know all the facts. Now, you pretend like you do, and if you don't know the facts, you tend to make them up. Let's make the story a little better than it really is, and that way I'm the most popular guy at the party. Once heard a story of this guy. He owned a manufacturing plant, and it was his habit. He walked through the plant every morning to check on things, see how they were going. So he walked through the plant, and he got to the very back of the plant, which is typically where the warehouse is. It's where trucks show up, carry the product from here to there. He noticed this gentleman sitting on the side on a stack of pallets, had his hands in his pockets, kind of whistling along, watching the day go by. He noticed him. He continued his walk through the plant. Came back 15 minutes later, the guy's still sitting there. He walked over to him, and he said, hey, pal, how much money you make a week? He said, $300. He opened his wallet, peeled off 3 fresh $100 bills, and said, get out of here and don't ever come back. The warehouse foreman saw that, walked over to the owner of the plant, and the owner of the plant said, hey, man, how long's that guy been working here? And he said, man, he doesn't work here. He was here picking up a package. Sometimes we make judgments about people. In fact, most of the time our judgment of people is lacking of fact. It's lacking of knowing anything about their heart or the position they're in. We don't know anything about it. And who are you? Like Jesus is saying, he's asking that question, who are you to judge anybody? Listen, you people are a wreck. And when I say you people, I mean this people too. We're a mess. Who are we to judge or criticize people without knowing what really is going on in their life? You know, it's a funny thing about people. If you really think about it, you only know 3 or 4 people well. Maybe your immediate family. And if you've had as many kids as the Deals have had, you know 6 people well. I've known folks who had 11 kids. They know 13 people well. Mom, dad, 11 kids. But if you think about the people you interact with day to day, you don't really know their heart. Don't pretend like you do, because you do not. People are like icebergs. You see a little bit of that iceberg, but most of it's where? It's under the water. You don't see that about people. You see very superficial snippets of people's lives as just a traditional church-going person walking around on the streets. You know, if you've ever been to like a sales convention, some of you never been to a sales convention, but let me tell you something. The thing about a sales convention is that they're all salesmen. And so, you know, they're all gregarious. They got these gregarious personalities, and, you know, they got good smiles, and they've got their hair parted just right. And I mean, it's thick, and if it's not thick, they'll figure out something else to do with it. So they look the part, and they all go through their, man, how you doing? Hey, good to see you. How's your mom? How's your family? Boy, it's hot out, isn't it? Like you have these little conversations, and then guess what? You go on to the next guy, and then the next guy, and then the next guy. But you don't know those people. And so when you sit in judgment of others, there are so many things that are wrong with that. But maybe the main thing is that you don't know their heart. You don't know anything about them. You've just chosen to shoot at them for no reason. That's a poor choice of words today. So there is caution to be heeded in this first point. We all fail God. We all sin. And so criticism has no place in our daily dialogue with people. Point 2, there's a challenge to be heard. Let's look at verses 3 and 4. There's a challenge here, verses 3 and 4. Why do you see the speck that's in your own brother's eye, but do not notice the log that's in your own eye? Or how can you say to your other brother, or to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? Now this is comedic in a way. Because if you get a little speck in your eye, I don't know about you, it drives me crazy. I don't like anything around my eyeballs. When I go to the eye doctor, I've got glaucoma, so twice a year I've got to go to the doctor. They got to fix my eye drops because the pressure in my eye is too high. And I go and they drop these drops in my eye and they sting like fire. And they're all around my eyeballs, and I'm a squeezer. And they call me that. There's the squeezer. By the way, I am very young in an eye doctor's office, so it makes me feel really good. Not in a regular eye doctor, but if you got something bad like glaucoma and you go in there as a 53-year-old man, you're like, yeah, I'm looking pretty good here. Because everybody else is a little further down the road. But I'm a squeezer. I hate things to be in my eye. So here, this guy's got a speck in his eye, and who's going to come charging in to fix it? A guy with a 2x4 sticking out of his eye. Think about the comedy in that. What a great example to you and I. You got a speck in your eye, and the person that comes to help you has got a 2x4 in his. That makes no sense. He uses this humorous image, and when I look at your faults and shortcomings, sometimes we're actually blind to the problems that exist in our own heart. Because if my heart was pure, if it was as pure as it should be, I wouldn't be focused on your faults and your shortcomings. If my heart was really pure, instead I'd be loving you. I'd be praying for you. I'd be trying to help you. I'd be seeking to restore you. I'd be trying to build you up. And if you and I in the church won't do that for people, who will? Who will? Who exists out here that's trying to reach out to people and help them without being critical? The problem with judging is we're often guilty of the same sin ourselves. Romans 2:1, for in passing judgment on another you condemn yourself. None of us have anything to brag about. Jesus is saying that sin of the critic is worse than the sin of the one being judged. So do we have a genuine lack of love for our neighbor? It's a fair question. It's a fair question. Or do we sit on our high horse and talk about all the stuff our neighbor should be doing and is not? There's an old poem that says, there is so much good in the worst of us, and so much bad in the best of us, that it hardly behooves any of us to talk about the rest of us. I'm going to repeat that. There is so much good in the worst of us, and so much bad in the best of us, that it hardly behooves any of us to talk about the rest of us. The third point, there is a counsel to be honored. Let's look at verse 5. You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Now this is pretty strong language here that Jesus is using. He calls the judges among us hypocrites, but he also offers some very wise counsel. He tells us to clean up our own life so we're in a better position to help our brother. That's right. A clean heart leads to better vision. Ultimately, that's what that means. A clean heart leads to better vision. Leviticus 19:17, I'm paraphrasing, but basically says it's not wrong to confront a brother regarding his sin. In fact, you're wrong if you don't. You're wrong if you don't. Now, that's not to say that you're going to like it. Most people are not going to like it. When you confront them about their sin, they're going to give you 18 different reasons why they're behaving the way they do. But it's still not wrong for you to confront them. In fact, you're commissioned to do so. Refusing to confront a person about sins like a doctor being unwilling to treat your illness. If I go to the doctor, I expect the doctor is going to dole something out to help me a little bit. I don't expect miracles necessarily. But if I'm sick, I'd like a little something. And that kind of says it all. You cannot judge a tree by its leaves, but you can judge a tree by its fruit. I once heard a story about a lady. She was waiting in the airport. She was in a terminal. She had a layover. So she had about an hour and a half. And so she thought, I'm a little hungry. I'm going to go get a snack. So she bought her a Coca-Cola and a pack of cookies. She made her way back over to the terminal. And if you've been in an airport terminal, they've got twice more seats than they need. And you know why that is? Nobody sits by one another. Right? Unless it's family. The families will sit together. But there'll always be a seat between you and the next guy. Always. For the most part. And so, as luck would have it this day, she goes and takes her seat and puts her bag in the seat beside her. There's a gentleman on the other side. He reaches down, picks up a pack of cookies. She believes to be hers, and he opens them. He eats the first cookie. She looks at him like, what in the world? He's eating my cookies. So she thought, no, I'll not be outdone. She reaches over to the bag and gets a cookie herself. Eats it, and is staring at him as she's chewing it. Like in a very enjoyable way, as if to say, what are you doing eating my cookies? This went back and forth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. to the seventh cookie, the final cookie. The man reached in the bag, took out the seventh cookie, broke it in half, put half of it in his mouth, and laid the other half on her package, and got up and walked away. Well, a few minutes later, they called for the people to start boarding the plane. She got in the plane, took a book, put her spectacles on, looked into her pocketbook, and there was her pack of cookies. All this time, she's thinking, that guy is eating my cookies. But they weren't her cookies at all. She just made this judgment. This guy, how dare he be so selfish and egocentric that he would eat my cookies, not realizing she hadn't even taken her cookies out of her purse. So she just rushes to judgment here. We're so quick to be critical of the people around us. So quick. And it's really reached a fevered pitch because even in our culture today, it's so divisive. It's not even about disagreeing anymore. There was a day that if Will Combs and I were having a debate about something, and he agreed or disagreed with me, rather, I still love Will. He's wrong, but I still love him. Right? It's kind of our attitude. He's wrong, but I still love him. We still loved him. In our discourse today with people, we don't have a loving attitude. So many times, we want to take it personal, and we want to make it a personal thing that we just really struggle ever getting past. So there's two dangers here as we go. If you're a note taker, make sure you write these down. Because in this passage, we need to make sure we get these two things right. Here are the two dangers. Number one, we fail to deal with a brother or sister at all. We have, again, this laissez-faire approach. Judge not lest you be judged. I don't want to get in the middle of that. I'm just going to let them run their course. I don't want a problem with that, but as Matt so capably read in Galatians 6:1, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. But to do that, to help people restore themselves, you have to come from underneath. That's where Jesus fell out with the Pharisees. They didn't come to people from underneath. They came from this position of elitism. I know the rules. Not only do I know them, I made them. And so you people just need to get in line. You are not going to get flies without some honey. You're just not. And so failing to deal with a brother at all is not the point here that Jesus has. In fact, we're told we're absolutely supposed to come alongside people and help them deal with sin. There's this delicate tension between us. There's a delicate tension, not just in the Christian church, but in all of the world. There's a tension between people regarding what's right and what's wrong, what's judgmental, what's critical. But all that, I really believe Jesus is telling us, can be overcome based on the way we approach our fellow man. Do we come from underneath? Or do we come from some position of loftiness? And then the second danger as we go is that we don't discriminate at all. Friends, we must discriminate. Not from a standpoint of socioeconomically or racially or anything like that. Don't misunderstand that. But we are commissioned. Jesus tells Peter, hey, Satan's going to sift you like wheat. You remember that? Sift you like wheat. Once he sifts you, he'll know what's left is real. What's left is real once you sift that wheat. You got that. Some of you don't even know what a wheat sifter is, but you got this square and it's got this mesh in the bottom, and you take and you shift, and then the chaff falls out on the ground, and then what's left is the good seed. we have to discriminate because ultimately it's the only way to identify false prophets. Otherwise, the church is on its road to heresy from now on. And from that, it will never recover. So ultimately, it's about our attitude toward others. So here's the question you ask yourself. As you approach your fellow man, are you doing it in a way that honors God? As you confront sin with one another? As you keep one another accountable? Or are you trying to exalt yourself? Are you coming to people from a position of haughtiness so it makes you look great? Well, they called me in. I had to take care of that. You know, I had to go down the road and talk to my neighbor and get him straightened out. That's not what Jesus is calling us to do. And so ultimately, it's about your attitude, it's about my attitude, and how we approach sin. Let's pray. Father, we're grateful today for our church, and we're grateful today for America and for the freedoms that we enjoy. Lord, as we process this passage in the book of Matthew 7, Lord, I just pray that we will be very cautious about being judgmental and critical toward other people, and yet, at the same time, we'll keep healthy tension between us so that we're accountable one to another, and more importantly to you, God Almighty. Father, I pray if there's one here today who's never known you, that they'd make an eternal decision for you. And Lord, for those of us who are Christians that are within the sound of my voice, Lord, if we're not living like Christians, Father, may you help us to start doing so that we spend our days glorifying you, building others up, approaching them, Father, with a sense of humility, and being all the while thankful to you for your Son, Jesus. And it's in his name I ask this prayer. Amen.